Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal, and sorry for the background noise. I don't have any air conditioning in my kitchen, so I have to have two fans running to keep it reasonably cool. Today is June 18th, and we are going to talk about the career of a back alley butcher. Dr. Hugh Benjamin Munson, who generally was referred to as H. Benjamin Munson, had been practicing criminal abortion in Rapid City, South Dakota as early as 1967. In 1969, he was convicted of performing an abortion on a 19-year-old patient. He appealed in the circuit court and won his appeal. Then the state appealed, and the South Dakota Supreme Court upheld his conviction. Munson was in the process of appealing this decision when Roe v. Wade came down, rendered everything moot, and he was free to practice at will. So, to my knowledge, there has never been a single death associated with Munson's criminal abortion practice. So, 67, 68, 69, 70, 71, 72. That's 6 years that he was practicing criminal abortion in Rapid City, South Dakota. Not a single dead patient that I've been able to find attributed to him. Into this situation walked 28-year-old Linda Padfield. On June 14th of 1973, Linda traveled the 5-hour trip from her home in Groton, South Dakota to Munson's clinic in Rapid City. She was accompanied by a friend and her 3 small children. The next day, Linda went to Munson's clinic and he performed the abortion, and Linda and her children and her friend went to spend the night at a nearby hotel. Now, according to Linda's friend, Munson was supposed to come to the hotel and check on Linda, but he didn't come by, and they tried to call and couldn't reach him. And finally, they decided to do some sightseeing and kind of make a 2-day trip going home so the children could see some of the countryside. But by the time they got home on the 17th, Linda was very sick, nausea, high fever. It's at this point she told her mother that she hadn't been going to Rapid City to visit a friend. She had been going for an abortion. Her mother took her to St. Luke's Hospital in Aberdeen, but in spite of emergency surgery, she died on June 18th. Now, for some reason, there is not a word of coverage in the news until almost to the day 3 years later. Munson was arrested and charged with manslaughter on June 17, 1976. Now, there was immediate wrangling. Munson and his team were arguing that the 3-year statute of limitations had expired because the abortion had been performed on the 15th, 2 days early. The prosecution argued that the statute of limitations on manslaughter started running when the person actually died, and the judge agreed, and the case went forward. Now, Munson also alleged that the decision to prosecute was made in bad faith. Attorney General William Janklow was opposed to abortion, and Munson's attorney noted that of the slightly more than 1,500 abortions performed a year in South Dakota, pretty much all of them were performed by Munson, and that arresting Munson would halt abortion in South Dakota. Janklow pointed out that he hadn't taken any steps to stop anybody else from walking in and filling in Munson's shoes, hadn't taken any steps to stop anybody else who'd been reporting abortions in South Dakota. He was just going after Munson. Abortion rights activists did consider this to be a direct attack on abortion rights. The National Abortion Rights Action League started a defense fund for Munson and raised over $40,000 for his defense, which is over $200,000 in 2022 dollars. And they also took out a large ad in the newspaper offering public support for Munson. And again, this is something I noticed, that the pro-lifers tend to immediately assume that the abortion practitioner was a horrible quack, just out to kill women, totally irresponsible, abortion is dangerous, and the pro-choicers tend to go, he does abortion, so, oh, he's a saint, he provides vital reproductive health care services. Which, I mean, these are people who defended Bruce Steer and, oh, what's his name? Raymond Showery in Texas. You have to be a Kermit Gosnell or an Abu Hayat. You have to rise to that level of horrific before the abortion lobby is going to decide that you're not a good doctor. As long as you pick up those forceps and start pulling off little baby arms and legs, you're good by them. So jury selection was held behind closed doors. The circuit court judge, Merton Tice Jr., said that he wanted to have prospective jurors free from influence outside those which were proper, which I guess he didn't want jurors reading anything about other jurors questioning in the paper. I don't know. The Rapid City Journal fought to have the closure lifted, but they won, and the jury was sequestered during the trial. And although he didn't put forth a gag order, Judge Tice did ask the attorneys not to speak to the press, and they didn't. And on the first day of the trial, the jurors were taken on a tour of Munson's clinic. Now we get to the testimony of the doctors. One of the doctors who treated Linda at the hospital, Dr. James Hovland, said that Linda had been conscious when she first arrived, but deteriorated rapidly. She seemed to be going into kidney failure, and she had already lost so much blood, and her blood pressure was so low that she didn't bleed when they made an incision to do exploratory surgery. The prosecution asked why he didn't do an emergency hysterectomy, and Hovland said that given how gravely ill Linda already was, it's doubtful that she would have even survived the surgery. Dr. Vogel, another doctor who had treated Linda, agreed that she'd been awake and alert, but again showing signs of shock. And when the exploratory surgery showed no uterine or bowel perforation, they stopped what they were doing because they were afraid that if they traumatized her any further, this would kill her. One of the attorneys did ask Dr. Vogel if he would have performed a hysterectomy had he known that there were retained fetal parts in Linda's uterus, and he said yes, had he known that, he might have. There was only one person who knew that there were fetal parts in Linda's body, and that was Dr. Benjamin Munson, who had neglected to tell anybody. How much of Linda's unborn baby had he left behind? Well, the pathologist who did the autopsy found the remains of a 5-month fetus. It was missing the left leg, right arm, part of the skull, and part of the front of the torso. So a 5-month fetus typically weighs about 360 grams. The fetal remains that Munson had left in Linda's uterus totaled 240 grams. He'd only removed about a third of Linda's unborn baby. And the pathologist and other doctors testified that that was where everything started. That started the infection that caused the hemorrhage, that caused the adrenal failure that eventually killed Linda. The prosecution focused on the fact that infection will inevitably result from that much retained tissue, and that there was no way Munson could have been unaware that he had left a lot of tissue behind in Linda's body. The Attorney General later commented, you take a 3-inch leg off something, you have to know there's more than just the leg. And again, common sense, that does seem kind of obvious. I mean, the man went to medical school. He should be able to count to 4, 4 limbs. Arm, leg, and you should be able to count a skull, a torso. You should be able to tell whether you've got a whole baby out or not. And pulling out one arm, one leg, a chunk of skull, and a chunk of flesh from the front of the chest, that's not the entire body. However, Munson's attorney put forth this argument. 1, lots of abortion doctors send patients home with retained tissue. They figure the woman's just going to expel it later. No big deal. 2, yeah, retained tissue can cause infection, but that's an accepted risk. 3, the prosecution didn't prove that Munson knew that he'd left 2/3 of Linda's baby in her uterus. 4, the prosecution didn't prove that Munson had actually intended any harm. And 5, and this is the kicker, the only standard of care that applied was the local standard of care. And this wasn't applying just to abortion. This would be applied to any medical malpractice case. It's also called the community standard, and it's what doctors in that area typically do, because practice does vary regionally. And because Munson was pretty much the only person in South Dakota who did abortions, whatever Munson did was the standard of care, and thus Munson could not deviate from standard of care. He was the standard of care, which evidently leaving 2/3 of the baby in the womb and sending the woman for a five-hour drive home is the standard of care. So the judge agreed and ordered the jury to return a verdict of not guilty. Munson called the directed verdict like Christmas in October. Now, after having done this to Linda, he became a member of the National Abortion Federation when it was formed. Actually, I believe it was later that year. And he was free to practice the same standard of care he did with Linda. In 1985, he sent a teenage girl, Yvonne, home with retained tissue, and she, like Linda, died of infection. And again, he was prosecuted for manslaughter, and again, he beat the rap. Because, as the only abortionist in South Dakota, whatever he did was the standard of care. He literally could do no wrong unless you could prove that he was trying to hurt the patient. Munson is the third criminal abortionist I know of who had a clean record, not a single patient death that I could uncover prior to legalization, who went on to kill 2 patients in his safe and legal practice. The others are Mylan Vooch, whose egregious malpractice killed Georgiana English and Wilma Harris, and Jesse Ketchum, who performed outpatient hysterotomy abortions. That's like a mini C-section, outpatient, in his office, and let Margaret Smith and Carol Shanner bleed to death. Munson died of a ripe old age in a Vermont nursing home in 2003. Had Linda not turned to him for help, if she had instead gone to a pregnancy resource center, which already existed at that point, at the time of Munson's death, she would have been 57 years old, and her baby would have been 30. I'm sorry, abortion lobby. I just don't see Linda and her baby still being alive as a bad thing, and I don't see Munson as being a good doctor.